Welcome to Alternative Egypt, the channel that gives a voice to the myths and legends of our ancient ancestors. We appreciate you leaving a comment on our videos, and please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more alternative views on our ancient past.
In 2016, deep within the Great Pyramid of Giza, a team of scientists discovered a massive hidden chamber. Known as the Big Void, the chamber sits a short distance above the Grand Gallery within the monument. Using specialist scientific instruments in a technique known as muon tomography, the scientific team were able to use cosmic rays passing through the pyramid stone to make images, almost like an X-ray of the pyramid's interior. The discovery of this hidden chamber, which appears to have no obvious passageways leading to it, has baffled Egyptologists ever since its presence was first confirmed. Mebi Tayubi, co-director of the Scan Pyramids project, is convinced the mysterious new chamber was carefully planned by the builders.
It was not expected, as far as I know, by any sort of theory. It's not a false start, where they tried something and abandoned it. The engineering and design of this structure was carefully planned.
Naturally, the discovery of the Big Void made headline news all around the world, and immediately ignited speculation as to what might be found inside this mysterious space. Theories are many and varied, from the true burial chamber of Khufu to the mythical Hall of Records, and much else in between. But what no one seems to have considered is what the ancient Egyptians themselves tell us about the pyramid, and whether there might be a clue in those ancient sources that could perhaps reveal the truth of this newly discovered chamber and what it may be hiding within. Remarkably, there is one ancient Egyptian account that may very well present us with this information, and what it says is far from what any scholar or Egyptologist could ever imagine. This text is known as the Legend of Surid, and it tells of the reasons why the ancient Egyptians constructed the Giza pyramids. It was transcribed by medieval Arab scholars from Greek sources who had used original Coptic Egyptian sources, and which almost certainly came from sources stretching into deepest antiquity. The text tells us that the pharaoh Surid had a dream that the earth had overturned, and that the stars had wandered confusedly from their normal courses across the heavens. Concerned by this, Surid assembled his astronomer priests and instructed them to measure the height of the stars and see if any disaster might be foretold by them. The astronomer priests did as instructed, and later advised Surid that in 300 years' time, a great deluge would come, and that it would drown all of Egypt. Nothing would be spared. Upon hearing this grave news, Surid embarked upon the construction of a massive disaster recovery plan for his kingdom. He built pyramids, and into them he would place all of his treasures and valuable property. Most Egyptologists dismiss the Surid text as purely a medieval Arab fantasy, a myth. This view is based in part on the simple fact that the name Surid is not present in any of the ancient Egyptian king lists, of which there are several. The name Surid is thus regarded by scholars as purely a mythical king who never existed. However, in 1970, Hungarian scholar Sándor Fodor published his analysis of the origins of the Surid legend, and in that study, Fodor revealed a remarkable insight. He observed that the Greek word for Sufis, Khufu's Greek name, was very similar to the Arabic word Surid. The insightful Hungarian scholar realized that the Greek name Sufis could easily have been misread by the translator or copyist as Surid, thus furnishing the base for the Arabic form Surid. If Fodor is correct, then it means that the Surid legend should actually be attributed to a known ancient Egyptian king, Sufis, better known to us today as Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid. In short, The names Surid and Khufu may well belong to the same ancient Egyptian pharaoh. Essentially, then, it was Khufu who built the Giza monuments, not as a personal tomb for himself, but as a disaster recovery system for the kingdom. But the Surid legend tells us something more, something quite extraordinary. Surid didn't place only treasures within the pyramid. The legend tells us that into the pyramid were placed the bodies of Surid's, that is, Khufu's, ancestors. All of them. Now, this may sound like a very strange thing to do, but in terms of ancient Egyptian religious beliefs, this reinterment of his ancestors' mummified remains was absolutely vital for the security and hoped-for rebirth of the kingdom after the catastrophic flood event. This is because the deceased kings in ancient Egypt, known as the Osiris kings, were just as important in death as they were in life. The deceased kings, it was believed, could intercede directly with the gods in the heavens, the stars, for the benefit of the living kingdom. They could ensure the Nile would flow, the crops would grow, the winds would blow, and the sun would glow. However, were the bodies of the deceased Osiris kings to have been washed away and destroyed in the anticipated flood catastrophe, then there could be no rebirth of the kingdom. Not ever. The likely destruction of the original tombs of Khufu's ancestors by the deluge is why it would have been absolutely imperative that the mummified remains of these Osiris kings be removed from their original tombs and reinterred within an impregnable, hidden chamber, with no access passages or entrance, as high up within the immovable Great Pyramid as possible, far from the level of the anticipated floodwaters, where their preservation could ensure the rebirth of the kingdom after the deluge had destroyed it. This may then explain the mysterious Big Void. This could be the very chamber where Khufu may have reinterred his ancestor kings, each with their chief queen. They were the beating heart, the essential ingredient of Surid Khufu's disaster recovery system for his kingdom. But how do we know this? What evidence is there to show that this was indeed the true purpose of the Giza pyramids, in particular, the Great Pyramid? Our first piece of evidence comes from the very name of the Great Pyramid known as Akhet Khufu, which most Egyptologists interpret as meaning the horizon of Khufu. Of this name, American Egyptologist Mark Lehner writes,
Khufu's pyramid was Akhet Khufu. Here, and in the pyramid texts, Akhet is written with the crested ibis and elliptical land sign, not with the hieroglyph of the sun disk between two mountains that was used later to write horizon. Joining the stars, the king becomes an Ak. Ak is often translated as spirit or spirit state. It derives from the term for radiant light, written with the crested ibis.
We now know, then, that the word Akhet in the Great Pyramid's name does not mean horizon, as most Egyptologists assert, but instead means spirit or soul. But what of the other part of the Great Pyramid's name, Khufu? What does this mean? Before we consider this, the first thing to understand is that the name Khufu is believed to be an abbreviated form of Khufu's full name, which is Khnum Khufu. The ancient Egyptian god Khnum was known as the protector of the souls of the virtuous or the blessed dead, and controller of the earth's waters. The word Khufu on its own simply means protect. In this sense, there could be no better god to associate with the Great Pyramid, whose very function in this hypothesis was to protect the bodies of the deceased kings, and by extension, their souls, against a coming catastrophic deluge. Thus, the pyramid's full name, Akhet Khnum Khufu, might reasonably be interpreted simply as Khnum protects souls, which is exactly what the Great Pyramid was designed to do. The pyramid sign at the end of the name Akhet Khufu may, in fact, be serving as a determinative, a special sign that provides a specific context to a particular piece of text. As controller of the earth's waters, the god Khnum would protect the souls of the deceased from destruction by a coming deluge, exactly as the Surid legend tells us the Great Pyramid was designed to do. Our next piece of evidence comes from this inscription, which is believed to be one of the ancient Egyptian names for the Giza Plateau, which Egyptologists interpret as Pyramid Town, Horizon of Khufu. We have already seen how Egyptology has probably misinterpreted the Egyptian word Akhet as meaning horizon, when it more likely should be interpreted as soul or spirit. But there is another highly significant sign within this inscription which is barely ever considered by Egyptologists. The rectangular sign in the blue box here, which is the ancient Egyptian sign for a lake or a pool of water. Some ancient Egyptian texts consider this sign as a symbol for the Duat, which in ancient Egyptian theology represented a dark, watery realm. And look how the town or region sign is placed underneath the water sign, perhaps indicating that the city is under a body of water, the land drowned, just as the Surid legend states. If we now consider the full meaning of this inscription, rather than Pyramid Town, Horizon of Khufu, as Egyptologists interpret it, this inscription might be more closely interpreted as Khnum protects the souls of the deceased kings against the flood that will drown the entire land. In this respect, once again the Great Pyramid placed at the end of the inscription serves as a determinative to this particular purpose, a structure built to provide the souls of the Osiris kings with a safe haven against a coming catastrophic flood. Our third piece of evidence comes from the ancient Egyptian pyramid hieroglyph, but more particularly, the base upon which the pyramid stands. Most Egyptologists assume this base is simply a two-dimensional rendering of the low enclosure wall which surrounded most pyramids. The problem with this interpretation, however, is that when we study the pyramid base hieroglyph, we find that many of them have an ellipsis sign as the base, while others have a rectangle sign. The ellipsis is the ancient Egyptian hieroglyph for island, and, as we already have seen, the rectangular base is the hieroglyph for lake, or duat. What we may in fact be observing in the pyramid hieroglyph is not its enclosure wall at all, but rather an expression of the pyramid surrounded by, or emerging from, a large body of water, just as an island is surrounded by water. We are essentially seeing the pyramid as an icon, standing tall against the deluge, protecting the souls of its precious cargo, the deceased Osiris kings and queens within the big void, high above the floodwaters. This interpretation of the pyramid's base as symbolizing a body of water, and not merely as a mundane enclosure wall with no symbolic meaning whatsoever, is presented to us in one of the small Queen's pyramids of Senwosret I. Here we observe that the pyramid's enclosure wall has a wave-like pattern, and when viewed from the pyramid's apex, this undulating pattern would create the ancient Egyptian hieroglyph for water. Our next piece of evidence comes from a feature that has long puzzled and caused much discussion and controversy: the Great Pyramid's so-called star shafts, a feature of the Great Pyramid that is truly unique. No other pyramid contains these narrow shafts. Many scholars have long believed that these shafts were built into the Great Pyramid to provide the soul of the deceased access to the heavens, where it could ascend to the stars in the southern and northern skies, the abode of the soul's eternal afterlife. Now, as we shall shortly see in this video, there is good reason to suggest that only the Great Pyramid was used by Surid Khufu as the repository for his reinterred ancestor, Osiris kings. As such, this explains exactly why the Great Pyramid, and only the Great Pyramid, contains these star shaft features. to provide access to the heavens for the souls of the deceased, reinterred ancestor kings. In 1881, at Deir el-Bahari in Egypt, Egyptologists discovered a royal cache of ancient Egyptian mummified kings, queens, and other members of the royal household, spread across 5 dynasties. Some of these kings included the mummified remains of Ramses I, the second, the third, and the ninth, Seti I, Amenhotep I, Thutmose I, the second, and the third, along with some of their queens. It was a quite extraordinary discovery. The point here is simply this. While many ancient Egyptian pharaohs and their queens have been found in Egypt from later dynasties, not a single one of these discovered pharaohs was from before the time of Surid Khufu. In other words, not a single one of Surid Khufu's ancestors has been found. We can only speculate that the reason for this is because these ancestors were removed from their much less secure tombs and reinterred within the Great Pyramid, just as the Surid legend tells us. Of course, were Khufu's ancestors to have been removed from their original tombs and reinterred in the more secure location within the Great Pyramid's Big Void, then it stands to reason that some of the original burials may have survived into modern times, but with empty sarcophagi. Remarkably, this is exactly what we find. While excavating at Giza in the early 1930s, American Egyptologist George Reisner stumbled upon the hidden underground tomb of Queen Hetepheres, the wife of the pharaoh Sneferu and mother of Khufu. Incredibly, the tomb had never been disturbed, as several precious items were recovered, including gold. Also, the sarcophagus itself was still fully intact and with its original ancient seals. The discovery of Khufu's mother would have been the discovery of the century. Egyptologist Barbara Mertz describes the moment Reisner opened the queen's sarcophagus.
Distinguished visitors and high government officials were lowered down the shaft in basket chairs and crammed themselves into the little room. The great moment had arrived. The heavy sarcophagus lid was prized up. In a hush of anticipation, Reisner stooped to peer inside. Then he straightened and faced the distinguished audience. "Gentlemen," he said wryly, "I regret Queen Hetepheres is not receiving."
Astonishingly, the undisturbed sarcophagus was completely empty.
What puzzled Reisner was why the elaborate care and secrecy had been expended on the burial of an empty sarcophagus. It had been used for burial. Certain discolorations on the bottom proved that much. What disturbs me is the fact that there have been other sarcophagi found in place, unopened and empty. 2 of them date to the 3rd dynasty, not so distant in time from the heyday of Hetepheres. The cases are not exactly parallel, but yet there remains the incontestable and bewildering common feature of the empty sarcophagi.
These sealed, yet empty sarcophagi is exactly what we might expect to find had Khufu removed the mummies and reinterred them in the Great Pyramid, just as the Surid legend tells us. The body would have been removed, the sarcophagi closed, and the tomb ritually resealed, leaving modern scholars to puzzle over where the bodies went. But what evidence is there that might support the view that the Big Void could contain Surid Khufu's ancestor kings and queens, as the Surid legend suggests? The answer to this comes from another mysterious chamber within the Great Pyramid, the massive Grand Gallery. There is no other chamber quite like it in any other pyramid in all of Egypt. It truly is unique and, unsurprisingly, to this day Egyptology still puzzles over its purpose. Why was such a massive, seemingly empty chamber needed within the monument? The first clue as to the purpose of the Grand Gallery comes to us from the medieval Arab scholars, who write of the first entry into this chamber after the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun had blasted his way into the pyramid in 820 CE.
That the Grand Gallery is simply the gallery of the ancestors is corroborated by two ancient Arab authors. Al-Nadim, quoted by al-Makrizi, writes, "A passage pierces this pavement. The arch is made of stone, and one sees there portraits and statues standing or resting, and a quantity of other things, the meaning of which we do not understand." And Wasif Shah writes, "In the Eastern Pyramid, that is, the Great Pyramid, chambers had been built in which the stars and heavens were depicted, and in which were amassed the statues that were done of Surid's forebears."
As we gaze upon the Grand Gallery today, it is self-evident that if any statues of Surid Khufu's ancestors were ever present there, they have long since been removed, leaving us to ponder whether this medieval Arab account is simply a made-up story, a fable. However, further explorations of the Grand Gallery seem to suggest otherwise, that in fact, these lost statues of Surid Khufu's ancestors did once exist within this mysterious space, and for a very particular and important reason. During his exploration of the Grand Gallery, Boston University professor Dr. Robert Schoch noticed a peculiar feature of the two narrow pavements that run either side of the gallery, top to bottom.
A series of 27 holes, occurring in pairs on either side, and alternating between longer ones of about 23.3 inches and shorter ones of about 20.5 inches. They are about 6¼ inches wide and cut to varying depths, usually 8 to 11 inches. In the walls above these holes are vertically arranged inset stones, each about 18 inches high and 13 inches wide, with a groove cut across each.
These 27 alternating sizes of wall and pavement sockets on either side of the Grand Gallery would be the type of feature we would expect to see had these two pavements once been lined with statues of Surid Khufu's 27 ancestor kings and queens. The pavement and wall sockets would have been essential to secure the statues on the 26-degree slope of the Grand Gallery, which may once have looked something like this. But why? Why would the Grand Gallery have housed all of these statues of Surid Khufu's ancestors? What was the point? To answer this, we have to understand a little about ancient Egyptian funerary beliefs. The whole point of mummification of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh was to ensure that his physical body was preserved, that it did not rot to dust. If this happened, then the king's Ka, his soul, might not be able to recognize its actual body and reunite with it. Were this to occur, then the king would die a second and permanent death. In this scenario, then this Osiris king could no longer assist in the hoped-for rebirth of the kingdom after the coming cataclysmic deluge. This, however, is where the king's Ka statue comes in. Most pharaohs had one, as they were absolutely essential to a pharaoh's proper burial and eternal afterlife. Egyptologist Pat Remler explains,
The Ka was a kind of astral double or spiritual duplicate of the deceased that was necessary for existence in the next world. When a person died, the Ka continued to dwell in the body, and one reason for mummification was to ensure the Ka a dwelling place. In case the mummy was damaged or destroyed, or had badly decayed, many Egyptians were buried with a Ka statue. The statue was a portrait of the deceased that the Ka could recognize and was meant to be an alternative dwelling for the Ka if the mummy was not suitable.
Another aspect of the ancient Egyptian funerary beliefs is that the Ka statue of the deceased was usually placed in a lower part of the tomb than the mummified body. Taking all of this together, then these statues that were once observed by Al-Mamun within the Grand Gallery were not simple profane statues of Surid Khufu's ancestors, but that they were, in fact, Ka statues of those ancestors, placed in a lower part of the tomb, as was their custom. Which implies, of course, that the actual mummified remains of these missing ancestor kings of Surid Khufu lie somewhere above their Ka statue. Where might that be? Of course, within the Big Void, just as the Surid legend suggests. The 27 large and 27 smaller inset holes in the two pavements of the Grand Gallery suggests that Ka statues once stood there, which further implies there are 27 ancestor kings and queens awaiting discovery within the Big Void. But just how many ancestor kings did Khufu actually have? Amazingly, using Manetho's list of ancient Egyptian pharaohs, when we count all of the kings from Khufu's father Sneferu all the way back to King Menes, the first king of the first dynasty of ancient Egypt, we find that there are exactly 27 kings, 27 ancestors of Khufu. In June 2025, during an appearance on the Matt Beal Limitless podcast, Dr. Hawass discussed the future exploration of the Big Void. During the podcast, it was revealed that Matt's corporation was funding some of the robotics that would be needed to explore the Big Void, and that this was scheduled to take place in November 2025 or January 2026. Alas, however, as of June 2026, there has been no announcement of the team's progress, and it now looks like it will be nearer the end of 2026 before any announcement is likely to be made.
This video presentation is based on the research of independent author and researcher Scott Crichton. His books are available on Amazon.com and from all good bookstores.